probably have heard, we're dedicating the next 3 weeks, starting today, to a discussion on the reality of racism, how it permeates our world, our country, our communities, and even our own hearts. And like everything else in our faith, whenever we have to have a tough conversation, whenever we have to make a decision, whenever we have to discern a course of action, we always start with God. We always remind ourselves who God is, how we have experienced God in the big picture, in the terms of world history, but also in our own lives, in our own lived experiences. Who is God? And then, after having reflected on that, we're called to ask, how can we imitate God? How can we specifically love like God? Because I think that's what our world needs. That's what we need so desperately, is God's love. So today is an opportunity just to focus on God, to let God be God, and to remind ourselves just how radically God loves us. This gospel passage that we just heard really, it really just says it all. God so loved the world, he gave his only son. Jesus came down. Jesus, who is King of the universe, came down as a helpless infant in Joseph and Mary's arms, dependent on them. In his life, he goes through everything we go through. He experiences poverty, not having what he wants. He experiences hunger, the loss of a friend, being frustrated at people he doesn't agree with, encountering others. He experiences friendship and love and everything else. That's how much God loves us. And I think sometimes we just take it for granted that, of course, Jesus is the good shepherd. He's going to go after that lost sheep, leave the 99 and go after the one that wandered off. And of course, God the Father is going to be there to welcome us back, just like the father of the prodigal son that runs out to meet him, embraces him with this huge hug, throws the biggest party that town has ever seen just to welcome him back. Of course God's like that. But God's like that even when it gets dirty, when it gets ugly. God still loves. You know, Jesus, on Good Friday, is such a powerful image to imagine Jesus on the cross. He's literally giving his life so that we might have life, that we might experience the mercy of God, that we might be saved. He's giving himself for us, emptying everything that he has for us. And while he's on his cross, he prays to the Father, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Even as we were killing Jesus, he was loving us. And then we see the two thieves, one on his right, the other on his left. This person, it's a public sinner, had sinned his entire life. Everybody knew it. He was getting what society thought he deserved. And what did Jesus do? He loved him. And he said, "Today, you will be with me in paradise." Jesus reveals to us that God is always loving us, even and maybe even especially when we don't have the answers, when we're overwhelmed, maybe even and especially when we, like that lost sheep, wander off, that he keeps coming out to meet us, to share his love with us, and to bring us back to that full communion of his love. As St. John says, God is love. That's a permanent and eternal statement. It doesn't stop. But it also doesn't pick and choose. God does not say, "I love these people, but not everyone else." Or God doesn't say, "I sent my son just to save maybe 3/4 of humanity. The other quarter, they're not such great people, so they're just going to, fend for themselves." No, he sent Jesus for everyone. As we look back The past month, the past 3 months, this quarantine, this year, 2020, has been absolutely insane. Who would have predicted any of this? And yet, here we are in this incredibly chaotic situation. I can't remember, I used to study in school. I remember in middle school and high school studying U.S. history and thinking, I wonder what it would have been like to be alive in 1968. Well, I think we've got that right now. So much division. Republicans and Democrats, and it's almost like with their words, they're doing violence. And it's like, you can't even listen to each other. And yet, God is loving both equally at the same time. We have these scenes around the country and even around the world, all these protesters and the police officers. And in some cases, sometimes they're yelling at each other. Sometimes they're becoming violent towards one another. And God, in that moment, is loving them both, is pouring out his heart, emptying himself in complete love to both sides. And we even think that incredibly tragic and unjust and absolutely terrible moment, those 8 minutes, 49 seconds, as George Floyd was fighting to survive, and then as he dies, God was loving him. God, looking down from heaven, was loving George Floyd with an eternal love. And the radical thing about Christianity that we believe is that at the same exact time, God was looking down at that police officer with the same love, giving him everything that he's got, pouring out his love. And that's not stopping. God loves with an eternal love that continues to empty itself for every single one of us, regardless of what we're doing, regardless of what we've done in the past, regardless of what we've experienced in our lives. God is love, loving us. That's our model. We are crafted, we are created to live in that love, to share that same love with one another in just as absolute, just as complete, just as generous kind of way. It is not easy, but that's who we authentically are. We are people created by God to love like God.